Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation with a changemaker working to accelerate the transition to a sustainable, carbon-neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Welcome back. We're going to talk about the built environment today and how to reduce its impact on our natural environment. The United Nations Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction reported in November 2022 that the building and construction sector of the economy accounts for 37% of energy and operations related to CO2 emissions globally. And in 2021, the sector hit an all-time high of 10 gigatons of CO2 emissions, about 2% higher than pre-pandemic levels. So we're going in the wrong direction. As we've discussed with guests in the past, new technologies for making concrete, steel, and other building materials are in the pipeline, and some of them are actually coming to market. But the benefits certainly are not showing up in the latest environmental impact data. That can be changed by moving more quickly towards a more efficient construction industry. A focus on highly efficient buildings, particularly those that embrace the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, or LEED program, is critical to making rapid progress. Our guest today is Tommy Linstroth. He's the founder and CEO of Green Badger, a software as a service company that provides management tools for sustainable building projects and to support LEED certification efforts. Green Badger connects architects, construction teams, building owners, sustainability and waste professionals to track and optimize their work. Tommy has also led more than 150 LEED construction team projects and is the founder of Sustainativity, which helps nonprofits complete sustainable building projects. You can learn more about Green Badger at getgreenbadger.com. All one word, no space, no dash, getgreenbadger.com. Welcome to the show, Tommy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. I appreciate you having me.
Well, you're calling from Savannah. I understand it's been kind of cold there recently. Did you get hit by the cold snap?
We did. Unfortunately, my citrus plants are now bare. The leaves have all fallen off, so I'm hopeful they will have a speedy recovery.
Well, I pray for your bud. So, this is an area, the built environment is something that all of us exist in, but a lot of this is driven by the decisions of real estate investors. So what I wanted to start by asking you is, let's say I'm a real estate investor and I'm thinking about a new building project. What's your elevator pitch for using the LEED standard, and how's it going to benefit me economically, not just in terms of the environmental benefits?
Sure. Well, I'm a big supporter of LEED, or really any third-party green building rating system. It's just, one of those, you wouldn't buy a car, right, if you weren't certain that it had been safety tested and that it was going to function. And that's a $20,000 or $30,000 decision. So to make a $10, $50, $100 million decision and just, not have verification that what you're getting is a high performance, healthy building, to me is just, that's not something I'd say. So my pitch to REITs and to, even small time developers, it's, do you want a high performance, healthy building? I've never heard anyone say they want a low performing, unhealthy building. Depending if they're a long-term investor and they're going to hold that asset for a while, do they want one that's going to have lower operating costs? There have been numbers of studies done that have shown LEED certified buildings get higher rent than their market. Because again, who wouldn't? If you're a customer, would you rather go to a green building or a not green building? And even just the end customers, you have, the General Services Administration, largest leaseholder in the United States, requires LEED certification as part of their tenancy. So if you want to have them as an occupant, you'd be well suited to get that type of certification. And there's plenty of Fortune 500 and corporate companies that have those same ethoses. So if you're not doing it, you're really at a competitive disadvantage than your neighbor who might have obtained that certification.
That's very encouraging to hear. So do you think at this point that sustainable construction is becoming a given in the construction industry?
I wouldn't say it's a given. It's about 30, it's grown from 30% to about 40%. I think you still have an awful lot of code compliant buildings that are getting built. And that's unfortunate. And that's what, that's why we exist. And what my passion is how do we make green construction affordable, easy, take all the barriers that people see so it does become the norm. And, frankly, as and talk about, we don't have the luxury of time. This is something we really need to see quicker adoption of. And anytime there's a barrier impediment to it, that just makes it all that more challenging.
Now, you've led more than 150 lead project teams. I'm wondering what, as you look back over your experience, are the most important problems for the construction industry to solve in order to reduce its both building phase carbon footprint and the operational carbon footprint of the buildings that are produced?
Sure. So it really, to me, starts with intent. I was fortunate. My background was in real estate development. I was the director of sustainability. And we had just an internal mandate that any building that we would design, build, own, and operate had to be LEED certified. We were long-term holders, so we had high self-interest in high-performing buildings. And really having that mindset from the start is where the critical action happens, right? By the time it gets to construction, a contractor is going to build what you tell them to build, right? If you tell them to build a green building, they'll build it. If you tell them not to, they won't, right? The construction teams are not typically the ones making the decisions about mechanical systems and PV. Those decisions have been made much sooner in the process. So really coming into it with that intent in mind is what sets the framework and is going to ensure that your building is going to end up being a high performing, healthy building.
So is it really a matter? I mean, obviously, architects, for instance, are going to specify what goes into the building, but is it a problem at this point still to source, for instance, lower carbon concrete, low carbon steel, and other components, or is it also a matter of making the whole construction process, what comes into the construction site and is either used or wasted, and then the haul away that's associated with cleaning up after you're done building? Where do you see the particular challenges?
It's definitely both. I mean, on the construction side, I think there are more known knowns there, and it's okay. We can figure out how to manage waste and how to reduce waste. On the embodied carbon side, again, that are you building a cross-laminated timber building or are you building a concrete and steel building? Like those are decisions that have profound impacts on the amount of carbon in products. I will say, embodied carbon, maybe I'm running in the wrong circles, but it has only really come to the market in the last couple of years, right? So It's not like it's been 20 years of talking about this. So I think it's still in its infancy, and I think there's still just a knowledge gap. I mean, there's products you can add to. Not going to advocate any particular manufacturer, but there's companies out there that supplement cement and concrete and reduce the embodied carbon by 5%, which doesn't sound huge, but as you know, concrete and cement is the largest emitter of CO2. So a 5% reduction, and it's simple and it's basically cost neutral and it's widespread across the country. So it's like, well, why is everybody not just specifying this? And I think that's still just a knowledge gap. If I went to a random architectural or structural designer, a lot of that's in the structural engineer in Savannah, would they be talking about embodied carbon and cement alternatives? Probably not. So I think there's still just a level of market education that needs to occur just to make people aware that even if it's incremental change, that's where you start. And it's, it's a no-brainer. Of course, we should have this lower embodied carbon in our concrete. And it's just, we've got to, it's so new. Again, 2 to 3 years in a construction industry is nothing. That's barely the life cycle of a project, right? So,
even one building, yeah.
Right. So I think I'm optimistic that we'll get there. And it's just, we can't jump to the conclusion that we're not doing enough because literally these companies have just started showing up here in the last couple of years.
So let's talk about Green Badger and what the software does. Does it, since it connects all those members of the supply and value chain that creates a building and produces it, does it help them identify options like low carbon concrete, or to plan better to reduce waste? How does it work?
It does some of all of the above. So we ourselves are just getting into the embodied carbon game here. So we're working with other cool partners like Building Transparency that help you model an entire building from your neck of the woods up in Seattle, and they help you really identify the embodied carbon. And then, we try and help just really demystify the process. A lot of times, again, it gets thrown to the contractor and says, well, find me a lower carbon ceiling tile. And they're like, just tell me what to use and when to use it. So what we do is we provide a pretty extensive database so that the teams can just say, look, I know we're using this brand. Does it meet the intent? Help us get through that. So we tend to save an awful lot of time because, all this stuff rolls downstream. So if the contractor gets asked, they're going to ask the subcontractor who's going to go to their vendor. And then, it becomes a very just laborious process. And when we've already got supply chain issues, and when you're trying to get a building built and it's getting held up for 6 weeks because you can't get a product approved that you weren't even told what to use, it doesn't make anybody happy. And so our system really tries to automate as much of that so that teams can source those products. They can not even source them, but just get the required paperwork that an architect needs to stay up to say that this is approved and we can use it. So we try to make the decision-making process quicker and easier for everybody up and down the chain.
So how do you maintain that growing database? It must be quite a challenge to track new materials coming in, as well as updating previously published information that you have, because obviously there's a lot of innovation going on in these materials.
There is, and that's great. And that's a challenge, but it's a challenge we welcome. And one of the upsides is that, a product manufacturer, a product doesn't necessarily change every year, right? It's like once you commit to, I'm making this ceiling tile and it's out of these materials, you have that and you get a good 5-year buffer is built into there. So it's not, we're not forced to have to keep our eye out, every month to look for an update. Sure. We tend to have a little bit of windows, and the manufacturers and the certification agencies, all of that we can work with to help make sure we're keeping that up to date and finding the new things that come off. We also use our project teams. I mean, we work with over 1,300 project teams. They're putting stuff in that we might not have seen, and we use them to crowdsource. We, of course, verify it. For us, there's no better source than on the ground. What is actually getting used on these green buildings across the country? And that helps us identify new products. It helps us identify trends, and it helps us when they ask us, hey, what can we do? Well, we see that these teams over here are using this. Maybe it's an alternative you can consider.
Interesting. So the crowdsourcing that's a fascinating aspect of this. So essentially, you're tracking what's going on and reflecting it back into the industry to say these are the changes that are helping.
Exactly, and that's what, to me, one of the cool things, because on the product side, a lot of times, if you're a product rep, you might be happy your product's getting specified in a project, but that's not. There's no certainty that that's actually what's used. We've got the proof in the pudding. Like if people are putting it in our system, it is on that building. And so for us, that gives us, again, a little more definitive trends to be able to reflect what we're actually seeing out there.
Now, the way that LEED certification works, and there's different levels from, I'm going to forget, bronze to platinum, I believe at this point, or maybe it's just gold still. How does Green Badger help identify the opportunity to earn a green credit? And does it help the building owner early in the process, or not the owner necessarily, or the architect, early in the process, plan for a LEED build or a LEED certification?
Sure. So our software currently is geared towards the contractor. So it really manages all of the things that go on over years of construction. But with that product database, we have seen a growing number of design team professionals that are utilizing it, because they are saying, look, I'm not a material scientist. I don't know how many parts per billion of this are in this product, and they can use our software and source it. And that we find that works really well, because they can pre-identify the products and they're all there for the contractor. Then the contractor is just verifying, did we end up using this, or did we replace it? And it just keeps it all in one spot. And what tends to happen is that somebody was counting on something to help them in one spot. They didn't know that it had all these other great sustainability attributes. And so they might have picked a product because it had recycled content, but it turns out it was low carbon, or it has material transparency. And whereas they wouldn't have thought they would be, earning some of those LEED credits, all of a sudden they're on their dashboard. It's just like, wow, holy cow. So unintentional sustainability counts just as much as intentional sustainability in my book.
Okay, so it's an accounting system for how you're doing. Now, the other thing that I found intriguing as I read about the platform is it also helps the contractor and the waste hauler coordinate and reduce the number of visits that the trucks have to make to the site, lowering the carbon emissions. But it also helps you reduce waste, both of which have a carbon impact. Tell us a little about how that works, and how does that continue to evolve? Because obviously haulers are still learning all this stuff too.
Yeah, I mean, so we're trying to do two things. One is make sure we're providing accurate reporting for the team, so that the LEED does have thresholds for waste. So you want to recycle as much as you can. And a lot of times you might think you're doing a good job, but you're not, right? And there's not good ways. So we help just facilitate the transparency and the communication of it. And as part of that, it's just better coordination between the contractor and the waste hauler, right? You don't want the waste hauler just showing up if your dumpster is only half full. So right. We're trying to help ensure that they come on demand, come as needed. Not, my garbage truck came today outside for my personal home service, and they don't know if it's half full or completely full. They're going to drive down that road once a week regardless. And we want to minimize that because, as you said, it's not just the waste itself, but it's the 4 miles per gallon these trucks are getting, and they're driving out to the landfill more frequently than they need to.
So for instance, let's say I'm in the middle of a project and it turns out that I didn't install the ceiling in the foyer of the building. So there isn't going to be waste today. Does that get communicated back to the hauler to say, we don't need you?
Not through the software directly. This is more just what we try and do as we collaborate with the contractors on their best practices and just helping keeping that open line of communication.
Okay. Now, we've also talked on the show with building information modeling companies, architectural design tool companies. Does Green Badger integrate with this new category of tools that are where you're building a digital twin first and then expressing the specification for the twin into the construction bill of goods?
Not yet. That's on our roadmap. I think it's, again, the more you can do in advance, just the better product you get. So if we can help communicate those sustainability attributes of products in the BIM model, and so you can know very early on that if we're picking these products, we're optimizing the carbon, or we're optimizing the material health of those products, that would be pretty cool. So we think that's coming down the road. Right now, our integrations, again, because our end user tends to be at the general contractor level, we work to integrate with their workflows. So the general construction management, their scheduling softwares, their submittal software. So we're starting with what our end users are, but the ultimate goal would be, how can we make that a very easy process upstream? Because as we started the conversation with, that's where a lot of those decisions get made.
Right.
And the sooner you can make those and know you're on the right path, the better off you are.
And you were also saying earlier, we're only about 3 or 5 years into this process. Do you actually, at this point, begin to see the construction companies rethinking their relationship with architects, with building owners at the two ends of the process, using these more sophisticated modeling tools, or are they simply being pulled along because everybody else is using it?
It's some of both. I mean, you have some market movers in the construction world that have said, look, this is important to us, whether the architect or owner asks for it or not. Mm-hmm. In the end, they're still really benchmarking in my book, because again, they're not the ones specifying products. They're just simply taking the side to say, well, what is the true embodied carbon impact? So that as they begin to look at 50 projects they've built, now they have, now they can be a little bit more involved with the discussion of how do we reduce it? Because again, it's still so new that until you've actually benchmarked some of these things, it's hard to identify where your best reduction opportunities are. And so you've got some contractors that are really progressively taking that upon themselves to do, so that they can begin to inform that design and talk to, because right now what I see, and I'm not a contractor, we're a software, but what happens is the owner says this is important to us. So of course it's important to the architect and it's important to the contractor, but they're still not like, we need a 50% reduction in embodied carbon, because they don't know what that looks like. So to me, the market's getting driven because the owner who's writing everybody's checks, it's becoming important to them. And what that's done is, set off this need to be able to actually understand what goes into the embodied carbon of a building, and how does that compare to the operational carbon after we turn this over. So I personally feel we're still in a benchmarking stage, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because you gotta know where you are before you know where you're going. And it'd be, we know steel and carbon are two big ones, of course, but there's still a lot of other variables that I think the market needs to better understand, and that's what we're looking at.
Well, let's take a quick commercial break, and I want to find out more about what we need to understand. We'll be right back. We're back to continue the conversation with Tommy Linstroth. He's the founder and CEO of Green Badger. They make a software platform for connecting the entire construction supply chain for a construction management company. So, Tommy, we've been talking about the LEED certification and other things, but Green Badger also helps document the ESG, or environmental, social, and governance data associated with a project. And it's pretty clear from what we've already talked about how you track emissions and energy use and water use and waste. But how does it track the social aspects, such as the use of minority or women-owned businesses, the wellness of the workers? What are you doing there?
Sure. So, just ESG is just becoming grown. You see it everywhere, right? And that it's trickling down and it's getting into actual construction levels versus LEED, like we've talked about, where, it's only on a percentage of buildings. I really think this is something that's going to affect every project moving forward. And so teams are clamoring for ways to figure out and understand, what does that mean? And so the environmental part has been, as you mentioned, I think the early focus. A lot of people have said, okay, well, ESG, how much energy are we using and what is the carbon? And sometimes it stops there. And so what we're trying to do is say, well, no, there are broader components, and some things like governance might be, better suited at a corporate or organizational level. And a lot of times the social side, it falls there. And people forget that for a construction company, half your workforce is in the field. They're not sitting in a desk in an office. And so we wanted to provide some functionality to help look at the social side of things on the project site. And so for us, that's capturing participation by minority and women-owned businesses, which is not new for the industry, but it's not something that I'd say every project captures. You capture it if you're doing a public project and there's a requirement, but should we stop there? No. So what we want to do is just provide a really easy methodology so that project teams can track participation by disadvantaged groups and set goals, and then roll that up for an organization. So you can look at it at a project level, you can look at it at a corporate level, but again, what we want to do is benchmark and then begin to improve. Right? It's not going to happen overnight, but if you're not looking at it broadly, it makes it tough to get a snapshot. And we just really wanted to tap into that as one of the first social metrics that we could help teams have and work to improve on.
So, for instance, with wellness, which is, for me, I keep thinking of the sign at the construction site that says days without injuries. Is this the modern version of that, including other aspects like the fact that people weren't out sick or that they aren't being exposed to toxins?
It's a lot of that, right? So OSHA is going to make sure you don't have the accidents. And, OSHA has done a great job of making everybody wear a hard hat, safety goggles, and a vest. You don't go onto any site without seeing those anymore. But it still goes back to, you sit in your office in your ergonomic chair with your filtered air, or you're in a job trailer, right? And it's like, man, we can't forget that. So there's all types of, construction is stressful. So do you have mental health breaks? Do you have, are you providing filtered water? Are you providing access to being able to eat food on site that's not just, fast food brought in? So there's a lot of aspects from wellness that, you're on a dusty construction site. Do you have filtration for the workers on site? Are they provided water breaks? If it's 100 degrees here in Savannah with the sun beating down, are you providing shade? Are you providing areas of respite for both the contracting team and the subcontractors? And there's a lot of things, and you can sort of pick and choose what's appropriate for your project, but it's really just, and we wanted to provide a framework to say that don't forget about the people at the site, because their physical environment is probably a lot more stressful than an office environment, as well as a list of options that you can begin to incorporate on your site. So it's not just, okay, I don't want to get hit in the eye, but it's I want to be able to have a comfortable, safe work environment that doesn't make me stress out.
Well, this is interesting because as I thought about what you work on, it's clear that you're seeing impacts and choices that a lot of businesses, not just in the construction industry, are going to need to embrace as they move forward. How do you recommend any company get started? What's the first step they should take after they decide to be efficient and sustainable?
So for their own operations, are we talking about?
Yeah.
So my background also, after I worked in development, was in consulting. And so we worked with a number of organizations to help them figure out their sustainability plans. And those were small nonprofits all the way up to, billion-dollar corporate organizations. And so there were a couple key components that come out. And it doesn't matter if you're big or small. The biggest driver that we've seen for success, though, is really having strong leadership and ensure that this is a commitment that everybody understands is important and believes it, and it's not just flavor of the month. What we've seen where programs fail is this is just another thing I need to do. Oh, I've got to do this. It's a bolt on to your job, not part of your job. It's just one more thing. Oh gosh, now I got to go do my sustainability thing, whatever that is. But if it's reflected from your company's leadership, whether it's a 5-person organization or 500,000, right? If it's reflected from your leadership that this is important, it gets embedded into the ethos of the organization. And so, bigger companies can have dedicated personnel for that, and we strongly recommend that they do. Smaller companies, maybe it's 20% of somebody's job, and maybe you need to bring in an outside consultant, to help you, so you're not having to struggle through it. So it's just making sure that it's firmly part of the company's strategic direction, and then again, however you can allocate resources to it to ensure that there's actionable items behind it. That those are where we've seen bigger success.
So let's get back to construction. Tell me about the tax and other incentives that exist now for LEED and energy efficient buildings. Are you seeing that change, particularly following the Inflation Reduction Act and all the new incentives that are being put in place?
Sure. So when LEED first started really getting popular in the early 2000s, you saw a lot of tax incentives. And I think some states still have property tax abatements, or you move to the front of the permitting line. You see a lot. I think there's about 1,000 municipalities that have some type of LEED ordinance in place. And sometimes it's a carrot, like an incentive, and sometimes it's just a mandate, like the city of Boston. Anything built in Boston has to be either LEED certified or equivalent. And so, I mean, that city transformed their entire building stock of new construction with that ordinance. And it's not, they're not incentivizing you to do it. They're just telling you this is how we do business. So I'm not an expert on all 50 states and their tax incentives, but there are definitely some out there. In the new Inflation Reduction Act, there's a big focus on embodied carbon there. So that I think is going to help, again, make this conversation more mainstream. The big part of the IRA that I think is valuable, and we haven't even spoken about, is the credits available for retrofitting, right? New construction makes up a portion of the built environment, but it's a small portion compared to the entire existing building stock that's out there. So being able to come in and address that. I mean, I'm in Savannah. There's a lot of really old buildings here. I was walking back from my house, which I built brand new to LEED Platinum, and I've got all my net zero solar and all this stuff. And I'm walking by a building I'm seeing getting renovated. They're putting up new siding, and literally behind that siding, there's nothing. Yeah. There's no insulation. There's no air barrier. So whoever's renting this apartment is going to be paying $600 a month in electricity costs in their 1,000 square foot apartment, because this existing building stock is just in such terrible shape. And, a landlord's probably not incentivized to go out and do that because they're not paying the utility bill. The IRA, by providing, up to I think $5,000 per unit, is hopefully making that more financially achievable. Because if we could build every new building net zero from here on out, but there's still millions of buildings that are probably not performing so great. And we need to have a way to do it. And frankly, the IRA hopefully is helping to incentivize that.
Yeah, that particular component of the IRA for the multifamily building seems very important to me, because a lot of renters are basically stuck with whatever they're given. And the idea that we can incent a landlord to do something right on a per unit basis. I mean, that's $5,000 per unit, which is enough to do the ceiling of the airspace that you were talking about. The other thing about the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's a criticism, is that the domestic content requirements are potentially going to restrict access to materials that are made in other countries. Do you see that as a blocker for rapid adoption of sustainability in construction, or is there enough domestic supply?
That's one of the trickier ones. Does it stimulate domestic production, which is probably what it's intended for, or does it prevent a bunch of really cool products from, Europe and other areas to do it? I'm to be determined on that. I mean, I think on one hand, I see the point of, yes, we want our domestic companies to start producing these type of products. On the other hand, is that a big roadblock? There have been Buy America has been written into a lot of products for the last, 10 or 20 years, and it has not, infringed upon buildings getting built because they have to use domestically sourced steel and other products. So I'd like to think it's not going to be a huge infringement, and the intent is to help drive and transform the marketplace, and hopefully that hits its intended result.
How do you suggest somebody who's thinking about buying a home or renting an office space do their due diligence about the choices that they've been presented. A lot of landlords won't even tell you anything, and a lot of construction companies, while they'll emphasize the good things they did, may not tell you everything that they didn't do. So how would you start?
Sure. Well, that's again the benefit of a third-party verification. You've got a stamp of approval, and maybe it's old because it's 10 years old, but to me it's still better than nothing. So, if you're starting with an Energy Star certified building or an Energy Star home or a LEED certified office space, those are certainly places to go. I remember when I was buying my first house, my realtor was able to get me the utility bills of the place because that was one of the questions I had. Now, I don't think too many people are asking about that, but that information does tend to be available, and you can use that to comparison shop. And I mean, I tell you, one spot is $500 a month, and the other is $200 a month. I'd rather apply that $300 a month difference to my mortgage and have a nicer place than shipping that money off to the utility company 500 miles away.
That's an interesting point. I mean, it really, there's historic data about the performance of the building or the office that you're going to acquire that a lot of people just never think to ask. What else would you? That's a practical idea. What else would I ask for?
I mean, some of it, and again, it's not everybody's an expert in energy efficiency, so it's tough. But you can do a quick audit, right? In that inspection period, if you're buying a house, you could go pay the $100 and have a blower door test done and find out if you're buying a leaky sieve of a house or if it's well sealed. I mean, man, air in the Southeast, air infiltration is the biggest issue. It's not even the level of insulation. It's that 90-degree hot, humid air is just seeping into my house. And if you can figure out that, maybe that's one you don't want to look at, or even just looking at, has the HVAC equipment been maintained? What type does it have? Is it electric radiant heat, which is the most inefficient type of heat? You're going to get killed in the winter when those bills come in. But, not everybody knows that, right? This is not common language at dinner parties talking about electric resistance heat in your building for everybody.
But you certainly see it in the spending. Great ideas. How do you envision the built environment changing over the next 15 to 20 years? Because we have the installed base that needs to be upgraded, obviously. Boston has a lot of new efficient buildings, but how quickly do you think we can start to bring every older building up to these standards?
Well, that's where the type of legislation, helped drive it. If you relied simply on the private sector, I don't think we would have a ton of rapid advancement, because a lot of people just aren't incentivized to do so. But when you have things where now, New York City, every building has to disclose its carbon, and there's a cap. And if you're above it, you're paying, right? Now you are incentivized to reduce the carbon of your building. And that took the city, right, putting that mandate in place. And, I'd like to think that you could replicate that type of directive if that's a change you want to see, right? You can't just sit around hoping it's going to happen. You've got to take a more proactive approach and drive building owners and landlords to embody that change you want to see.
So if Tommy were made president for a day with the ability to write one incentive into law, what would you recommend we do?
Ooh, that's a good one. Man, you could go so many directions with that. I'd love to see, renewable power for all new construction. I think, when you're tying it into the cost of new buildings, it becomes so much smaller than when you're sitting on an asset and now you're like, well, now I want to put solar on. I like the carbon disclosures and caps. I think would be pretty effective at transforming the existing building stock. So, without being overly creative with my answer, I'll go with a nationwide carbon audit cap for existing buildings that we can set reduction targets off of.
Well, let it be so. So, Tommy, how can folks follow along? You write a lot about this on your site and in your various locations, such as on Forbes.
Yeah, come join us at getgreenbadger.com. We put out a ton of content. Again, we do have software, but we put out what we like to think are a lot of just free, high quality resources because we see the need of this. This should not be a mystery. People need to figure out how to build greener, faster, and everything we can do is about that. So follow us, getgreenbadger.com, all of your favorite socials at getgreenbadger on Twitter and Instagram, and all of those other good things.
Well, thank you, Tommy, for spending some time with us today.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
We've been talking with Green Badger CEO Tommy Linstroth about the tools that they make for managing sustainable building projects and tracking LEED certification. You can find more information about Green Badger and read Tommy's blog at getgreenbadger.com. Get Green Badger is all one word, no spaces, no dashes, getgreenbadger.com. Well, here's what I learned today. An informed buyer can make a big impact on the composition of their home or office, and by extension, contribute to lowering the environmental impact of our built environment. From the embodied carbon in the materials used, that's the emissions associated with manufacturing, delivering, for instance, concrete, steel, wood, and other components of a building, to the ongoing emissions from operating a building or just living in an apartment, we have choices that can save money and reduce our environmental impact. Tommy's suggestion that asking for the historical utility bills from a home or apartment before you buy or sign a lease is an easy-to-access proxy for understanding the heating and cooling related impacts of your next home is a very good one. The other striking comment, for me at least, is the idea that we cannot count solely on the free market to deliver a qualitative improvement in our environmental performance or lifestyles. New York City's Local Law 97, which requires carbon auditing and fees for failing to achieve goals, is an example of how a community can shape a new future. Take a few minutes to find out if your city or county is exploring environmental performance regulations, and if you agree that this is a good idea, write a letter to your representative or city planning office asking for a change. It's up to us to shape our built environment, not just to accept what we're given. I hope you take a few minutes to share this show or any of the more than 370 episodes of Sustainability in Your Ear with your friends. If you take a minute to just write a review on your favorite podcasting site, you can also help others find us. You folks are the amplifiers that spread the ideas that lead to a less wasteful world. So let folks know that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, and your other favorite purveyors of podcast goodness. We will really appreciate your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. We'll be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.